Now I know this is a channel about the science of photography, but it's important to study the history of the technological advancements that led to where we are today for two reasons. First, it gives us an appreciation of past achievements, and second, it gives us insight into where photography will go into the future. Hey fellow photographers, what did you shoot today? I think it's part of human nature to want to document and record the world around us, and photography was the first real opportunity for ordinary people to create a visual record of their lives. While we explore this brief overview of photographic history, I want you to keep some common themes in mind. Almost all photographic advancement is aimed at making photography more accessible to a wider audience. It makes it easier to capture and process the image, increasing the quality of those images, decreasing the turnaround time from the capture to the final product, and increasing the ability to share those images. There are a lot of photographic achievements throughout history, and I won't have time to point out every detail, but if you'd like to hear more about a specific topic or era, or even something that I didn't cover, let me know in the comments. So where do we start? We already talked about the phenomenon of the camera obscura in the previous video, and we know that optics were studied well before that. Towards the late 1700s, people were experimenting with photosensitive chemicals, but those crude images would degrade and not last. Most people consider the birth of photography to occur around 1826 in France. This is where Niepce creates the oldest surviving photograph, the view from the window at Le Gras. It was made on a pewter plate with a thin coating of bitumen of Judea. While this doesn't look like much today, it was a huge scientific achievement at the time. The exposure time for this photograph is thought to have lasted at least 8 hours because the light from the sun strikes both sides of the street. But it is possible the exposure lasted several days. Niepce would go on to refine the process with the help of Louis Daguerre, and when Niepce died in 1833, Daguerre would carry on the process from Niepce's notes. Daguerre favored working with a silver-based process, but his greatest contribution was using a separate developing chemical. This greatly reduced exposure times needed to produce images. From his work, a full photographic process was published in 1839. The French government ended up buying the rights for the daguerreotype process and presented it as a gift to the world, unless you were British. This is where things get interesting. Across the channel, when a man by the name of Henry Fox Talbot heard the news, he claimed to have been making photographic negatives since 1835. From these negatives, multiple copies could be made, and he patented the calotype process in 1840. Unfortunately, because he charged licensing fees and because the pictures were not as sharp as the positives produced by the daguerreotype, the methods didn't catch on at the time, even though the negative-positive process would become the dominant process later on in photographic history. Okay, so back to Daguerre in 1839. Another part of his success was employing the help of Alphonse Giraud, a cabinet maker, and Charles Chevalier, a microscope lens maker, in order to provide a kit that included the camera as well as all the chemistry. The camera was fitted with a 380mm f/15 lens. Now we haven't talked about lens design yet, but if you know anything about photography, this lens is slow. And with an already slow development process, exposures could take tens of minutes. Enter Joseph Petzval, who used mathematics of optics to create the Petzval lens using both crown and flint glass, resulting in a distortion-corrected lens with an aperture of f/3.6. This reduced exposure times from about 20 minutes to around 1 or 2. The daguerreotype process becomes the dominant process of the time until Frederick Scott Archer used collodion to make the wet plate process. This came about in about 1851. Soon mobile darkrooms started popping up everywhere and helped to document historical events like the American Civil War. The issue with wet plate, as its name suggests, is that the plates had to be sensitized, exposed, and developed, all while the plates were still fresh in the chemicals. That is until about 1973, when the dry plate process is developed. This allowed you to shoot now and develop later, but we're still dealing with rigid plates. The next big advancement came with the development of cellulose nitrate film in about 1887. And this was flexible enough to be rolled into spools. And this right here is a big turning point from the beginnings of photography into the modern film era. George Eastman took this idea and ran with it, releasing the camera of the people, the Kodak, shortly thereafter. And even more importantly, the Brownie, which came out in 1900, which offered full service developing with the slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." So really this whole period right here is the era of Kodak. Now the idea of the Brownie camera, sort of you take the pictures and we do all developing, sounds a little familiar about something I heard recently. Roll film paves the way for the future, but cameras are still big and bulky. That's why, when a guy with asthma wants to go take pictures on his hikes, he makes a smaller camera. That man is Oscar Barnack, who laid the foundation for the Leica 1. Unfortunately, World War I delays the production of the camera, and it's not released until 1925, but it would change photography forever. By taking cinema film stock and turning it sideways, the era of the 35mm camera is born. And because the negatives were smaller, a higher standard of optics needed to be used. Carl Zeiss to the rescue. German engineering becomes the dominant force in photography, while Japanese companies that would eventually become Canon, Nikon, and Fujifilm reverse engineer the things coming out of Germany and try and compete. Unfortunately, the Second World War happens and throws a lot of camera manufacturers into disarray. It will take a little while for the Japanese companies to recover, but in the meantime, Polaroid comes out with this. The land camera with peel-apart film. Now developing photos is near instantaneous. A few years later, in 1955, a pivotal point is reached. With the release of the Nikon F. It wasn't really the first SLR, but it was the one that popularized that form of camera for the years to come. There was also this small event in 1969 where Hasselblad goes to the moon, but no big deal. 1971 marks one of Canon's most pivotal year with the release of the F1. It's directed at sports and action photography and is a bold move because they dedicated to making the FD mount lenses for at least 10 years. Now the pros can invest in a lens system and not have to worry about it changing every couple of years. 1973 marks the development of the C41 color negative process and the release of this, the Polaroid SX70. This is as fast as it gets from taking the picture to seeing the actual photograph. No longer do you have to peel apart the films, it's all done in one step. Now the first digital camera actually comes out in 1975, and it's made by Kodak, of all companies. But they don't pursue it because they're making too much money off the film, and they're like, hey, we got a good thing going here, we don't need that digital crap. Who wants to, plug this thing into a television and look at pictures on the television? No. Photographs are tangible. If people want to hold them, they want to have film, they want to have negatives, all that kind of stuff. Well, hindsight's 20/20. So really, the 70s and 80s are the heyday for photography, and photographers are celebrities. And you see this all the time. We talk about fashion really starting to take off. Magazines like Vogue are really going into their groove. And photography is great. Street photography takes off. And then things kind of take a turn for the digital world. So Photoshop is actually released in 1990. And by 2001, Polaroid files for bankruptcy. And then in 2004, Kodak says, we're no longer making film cameras. Digital is here to stay. In 2005, Canon releases the 5D, which is the first full-frame digital camera. Lightroom follows in 2007, and the 5D Mark II comes out in 2008, which offers full-frame 1080p HD video recording on a DSLR. From the mid-2000s onward, technology moves at such a rapid pace that it would be impossible to cover all the technological advancements. But some really interesting ones came out in 2011, which gave us the Foveon sensor, and in 2012, Litro starts flirting with light field technology. So where does it all go from here? Let's think back to our themes. More accessible. We're seeing this all the times with our camera phones getting better and better. More quality. We're nearing the limit of pixel pitch, but we'll see new curved sensors and sensors that gather light differently. Easier to take pictures. We're definitely going to see some advancement in autofocus technology and possibly some light field technology breakthroughs. While all this is going on, processing speeds are going to increase, and it will possibly allow for instantaneous editing in camera of our digital images. All in all, the future of photography is exciting and moving forward at breakneck speeds, but it helps to take a look back every once in a while to see how far we've come. The most important thing about the scientific and technological advancements in photography are that it opens up the techniques and processes of the past to be used purely for artistic purposes. That's all for now. What part of history interests you the most? What are you most looking forward to in the future? Leave your comments down below. If you like this video, consider subscribing to this channel to stay up to date on future topics. We're going to be talking about pinhole cameras next. And until then, happy shooting.